Good evening and welcome. Tonight I will be reading to you from this book called Frenemies in the Family, famous brothers and sisters who butted heads and had each other's backs. This is part of my Viewer's Choice series where you guys get to pick the topics that I make videos about at the end of the year, every year. This topic was requested by a big super fan of the channel, JJ Medusa, who wanted something about the Romanovs. So, as you can tell, there is a section in here about the Romanov siblings in particular, because this is about brothers and sisters. And I figured I would read to you about a secondary royal sibling pair. I'll also read you about Elizabeth I and Mary I to keep the theme. This book is okay. There's some interesting articles in here, like I don't agree with having the Gosselins in here. Those children were exploited. I would read you William and Harry, but this book came out almost 10 years ago and their relationship's completely different. They're not even talking, So yeah, we'll read the Romanovs and about Elizabeth and Mary because those sections are very good. But let's get into page 83, the doomed siblings. Let's see. Page 83. Here we go, the doomed siblings. Let me get my pencil to read. Before the Russian Revolution of 1917, life for the 5 royal Romanov children was a happily ever after fairy tale, a non-stop party. You might well ask, were the Romanovs some of the most spoiled children on earth? All the adults around them pampered them, but they didn't even have to be around adults. The children had their very own island on the lush grounds of their favorite palace, with their own little house and child-sized furniture. In the summer, they took bike rides, rode boats, rode ponies, played with dozens of pets, including 11 English collies. Winters were for sledding, building snowmen and castles, and skiing. Each one had a Kodak Brownie camera, cutting-edge technology at that time, and they delighted in taking dozens of pictures a day of themselves frolicking. Perhaps the first selfies. Yeah, Anastasia took the first selfie in history. Isn't that crazy? After dinner, they pasted their photos into deluxe albums of green Moroccan leather while their dad read aloud to them. Their 500 servants met their every need. They even included a librarian who supplied Dad with 20 of the best books from around the world each month. The children lived blissfully and totally secluded from the real world. It is very pleasant to spend time in a small family circle, said their doting dad. Dad was the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, who ruled over 130 million people and 1/6 of the planet. He was the richest monarch in the world, living like, a king, on money he took from his poor subjects. He owned 30 palaces, millions of acres of land, gold and silver mines, yachts, private trains, and jewels beyond measure. He was also the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, so his power was unlimited on earth and in heaven. Most of his subjects were starving, but anyone who spoke against him was exiled to faraway frozen Siberia. The 4 oldest Romanov siblings were girls. With Russian law forbidding women to rule, each was a slight disappointment, and all awaited a boy. The girls didn't let their lack of power ruin their fairy tale. They danced through their days in beautiful white dresses with colored sashes, their thick, glossy hair tied back with satin bows. Their perfumes were specially made for them in Paris: rose, jasmine, lilac, and violet. They played with lavish dolls sent by their great-great-grandma, Queen Victoria of England. The girls were homeschooled by their mom, Tsarina Alexandra, and private tutors. But since they weren't going to be in charge, they were allowed to do just enough to get by, learning a little basic math, a little science, and a lot of religion. They were supposed to study the 4 languages that were in use around court, but only Olga really mastered them. The 4 were so sheltered that in some ways they never really grew up. Even as they moved into their teens, they talked and behaved like little girls. Once, when 2 of them had the chance to go shopping in a store, they realized that they didn't know how to buy anything. They had never used money. The oldest, Olga, was only 6 years older than the youngest, Anastasia. Olga was gifted at the piano and probably the most well-read, keeping up with the newspapers. She even liked to put her stamp of approval on novels her mom wanted to read. Kind-hearted, she once threw her fancy doll out of the sleigh to a poor crying girl she saw by the side of the road. She was keenly aware of being the oldest, constantly pressured to be an example for the others. On her 16th birthday, her parents gave Olga diamond jewelry and threw her a full dress ball. While everyone gossiped about her future marriage prospects with princes, Olga was more inclined to flirt with army officers. Her goal was modest and the opposite of royal. To get married, live always in the countryside, winter and summer, always mix with good people, and no officialdom whatsoever. At 20, Olga began to use part of her enormous inheritance for charitable causes. As war and revolution brewed, she paid more attention to the outside world and was more aware than most in her family of how much Russians were turning against her parents. She often appeared sad and worried. You'd think Olga would have been her mom's favorite, but that was Tatiana. She was 18 months younger, a take-charge kind of person, especially skilled at scanning her mother's moods and responding appropriately. It was Tatiana whom the girls sent as their representative when they wanted their parents to grant a favor. I think anyone with siblings knows the one. That's their job, right? That was me. As the middle child, Maria seemed to be a scapegoat. Perhaps out of some form of sibling rivalry, she got picked on so much by her sisters, even the youngest one, that she had to be especially watched. No wonder she sometimes felt insecure and left out. The sisters objected to including Maria in their games and referred to her as stepsister, a harsh thing to call your biological sister. They nicknamed her Fat Little Bow Wow. She was surprisingly strong and sometimes amused herself by demonstrating how she could lift her tutors off the ground. Perhaps Maria inspired resentment because she never got into trouble. Once she stole some biscuits from her mother's tea table. As a punishment, Alexandra wanted to banish her to bed, but Nicholas excused her. I was always afraid of the wings growing. I am glad to see she's only a human child. She's a human child. Anastasia, the youngest sister, was Maria's opposite. Outgoing and afraid of nothing, she was often deliberately disobedient, eating apples she was told not to, or climbing trees and refusing to come down. Her cousins complained that when she didn't get her way, Anastasia was nasty to the point of being evil. She loathed school and was rumored to have tried to strangle her teacher. Once, playing a practical joke during a snowball fight, Anastasia rolled a rock into a snowball and threw it at Tatiana, knocking her to the ground. A talented mimic, she would hide underneath the bear rug in the sleigh and bark like a dog or cluck like a hen. Finally, as the girls began moving into their teens, a son was born in 1904. At last, an heir. But to everyone's horror, Alexei had inherited hemophilia, an incurable disease that prevents blood from clotting normally. Before modern medical treatments, life expectancy for hemophiliacs was only about 13 years. It was crucial that Alexei not injure himself. Even a trivial injury such as a bruise, a nosebleed, or a cut could be painful and life-threatening. 2 Navy sailors monitored him at all times and, as injuries were still unavoidable, carried him around when he was unable to walk during his long recoveries. It was also crucial that his illness was kept a state secret, so that the powers of the Romanov dynasty wouldn't come under question. Keeping Alexei's secret had the effect of isolating the family even further. The acute pain he suffered tortured his parents. He couldn't take aspirin or morphine, so his only relief was to pass out. Tsarina Alexandra, a deeply religious woman, came to rely on a mysterious faith healer named Rasputin. No one really knows how, but Rasputin did seem to help Alexei, where conventional doctors had failed. He became the only person around them they could trust. The siblings were taught to call Rasputin our friend and confide in him. The not very trustworthy Rasputin was able to gain influence over the Romanovs for his own benefit. All the illnesses and recoveries interfered with Alexei's education. He hated lessons and was even less well educated than his sisters. He was aware that he might not live to adulthood. When he was 10, Olga found him looking at the clouds. "I like to think and wonder," he said. Olga asked him what he liked to think about. "Oh, so many things," the boy said. "I enjoy the sun and the beauty of summer as long as I can." Alexei still found ways to be as mischievous as anyone else, or maybe more so. He threw pellets of bread at his dad's guards and played pranks on guests. At one formal dinner party, he removed the shoe of a woman from under the table and showed it to his father. Nicholas ordered him to return his trophy, which Alexei did, but not before placing a large juicy strawberry into the toe of the shoe. Olga was held responsible for Alexei's behavior at the table and restrained him from licking his plate, slouching, or teasing. Even when Alexei was a toddler, his father began to prepare him for his future role as Tsar by inviting him to sit in on long meetings with government ministers. He lorded his status over the others. At age 6, he told his sisters, "Now, girls, run away. I am busy. Someone has just called to see me on business." At 11, he complained of being the only man amongst all these women. Kind of obnoxious. The girls were affectionate with him, but remained a tight unit, despite minor squabbles and rivalries, sharing a collective identity that didn't include their brother. Sometimes they signed letters using the nickname Atma, which came from the first letters of their first names. The overwhelming concern for Alexei diverted the attention of the Romanovs from the Russian Revolution and Civil War, erupting as people became fed up with having so little while the royal family had so much. All were caught by surprise and sorrow in March 1917. The entire family, even the children, were arrested and imprisoned at their palace. Electricity, phone service, and the water supply were cut off, and most of their staff deserted them. If they stepped outside, angry crowds gathered to attack. Rasputin had been murdered a few months earlier by those who hated his sway over the royal family, and no one was coming to their rescue. Packing up luxurious possessions, including at least $14 million in jewels, they were moved to private residences for their own safety. Finally, they were moved to the House of Special Purpose in the far-off, dreaded Siberia. Under house arrest, the siblings grew closer than ever. For a time, their biggest enemy was boredom, which they tried to head off by reading, sewing, playing cards, trying to keep warm, and praying for rescue as this civil war played out. The children did all they could to cheer up their parents, especially Tatiana and Anastasia, who put on plays to make them laugh. Maria passed the time by attempting to befriend guards. She showed them pictures from her photo albums and talked with them about their families and her hopes for a new life in England when she was released. One guard smuggled in a birthday cake to celebrate Maria's 19th birthday on June 26, 1918. He was removed from his position, and the conditions of their imprisonment became even more strict. The girls took turns keeping their mother company. Alexei, confined to bed in severe pain after his latest injury, which was I think he tried to self-exit, to be honest. He took his sled and rode it down the stairs and crashed at the bottom. He never walked again after that, but yeah, he was confined to bed in severe pain after his latest injury. Played toy soldiers with a young kitchen assistant. Olga seemed deeply depressed and lost a great deal of weight. A guard recalled that the few times she walked outside, she stood there gazing sadly into the distance. Life got smaller and smaller. On July 4th, a harsh new leader arrived, barking orders to the family. Anastasia stuck her tongue out at him when he turned his back and left the room. On July 13th, Alexei felt well enough to take his first bath in 9 weeks. Oh, he must have been stinky. He was like 12 or 13 by then. He was probably stinky. On July 15th, Olga and her sisters joked with one another and moved the beds in their room so that visiting cleaning women could scrub the floor. On the night of July 16th, the family, plus their doctor, cook, and 2 servants, were awakened. They were told to go down to the basement, that there was unrest in the town and they would have to be moved again. Anastasia refused to leave her spaniel behind. The family was taken inside a room and informed that they were to be photographed to prove to the public that they were still alive. The family members were arranged appropriately and left alone for several minutes. Then gunmen walked in and started shooting. The Russian Revolution was a world cataclysm, changing Russia into the Soviet Union from a monarchy into a communist state. In the process, it killed 13 million people, including our royal siblings: Olga, age 22, Tatiana, 21, Maria, 19, Anastasia, 17, and Alexei, 13. There's these little boxes at the end of each little story here. A source of unending rumors. The bodies of the Romanovs were handled carelessly, hidden, and moved several times before being buried in an unmarked pit. In 1991, all but 2 of the bodies were dug up. Multiple laboratories in different countries confirmed their identity through DNA testing. But where were the other 2? Not until 2007 were the bodies of Alexei and Maria discovered nearby. They had probably been removed to lighten the load when the truck carrying the bodies got stuck in mud. The impostors. Many people, horrified at the thought of executing innocent children, wanted to believe that some of the Romanov siblings had escaped. Meanwhile, many impostors came forward, claiming to have survived the mass murder. The most famous was Anna Anderson, who insisted she was Anastasia. Though she was identified as a Polish factory worker with a history of mental illness, she had many supporters, including members of the royal family. Eventually, tests proved that her DNA didn't match that of the Romanov remains or of living relatives. Still in the news. The 5 Romanovs found together were given a proper burial in 1998. But as of 2016, when this book came out, the Russian Orthodox Church still refused to hold a funeral for Alexei and Maria denying the authenticity of their remains for mysterious political reasons. The 80 remaining descendants want the burial. Meanwhile, the siblings' bone fragments rest inside 2 small white boxes in a Moscow vault. How sad. But yes, those were the Romanov siblings. They are so fascinating. I love to look up their photographs because they're sometimes very formal, sometimes very candid. They were interesting people on the cusp of like the old times merging into the modern royalty, which was about to completely collapse after World War I, as they knew it back then, right? But let's go back to old-timey royalty. Your sister wants to kill you, really. Elizabeth I and Mary I. The British King Henry VIII doted on his daughter Mary at first. "This girl never cries," he boasted. In 1520, at 4 years old, Princess Mary was entertaining foreign visitors with her performances on the harpsichord. By 9, she could read and write Latin. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, oversaw her education, and Henry approved, calling Mary his pearl of the world and token of hope, even though, like pretty much every king, what he really wanted was a son. Poor Mary. Her dad was without question one of the world's worst husbands, with 6 wives in all. Henry VIII left the Catholic faith and forced all his subjects to join him so that he could divorce Catherine on shaky grounds, mainly that lack of a son thing, and banish her from court. It was a terrible blow to 17-year-old Mary, who never saw her mother again. Even worse, Henry's next wife, Anne Boleyn, had a daughter, Elizabeth, who instantly became the favored one. Anne stripped Mary of her princess title and forced her to act as a lady-in-waiting to the new princess, her baby half-sister. The indignities piled up. Mary actually had to walk behind the baby. Sometimes it took slaps to enforce this. Elizabeth got the place of honor at the table, and Mary ate in her rooms. The baby was dressed in gold-embroidered caps, gowns of green satin or orange velvet. No expense was spared for her, while Mary had to give up servants and return some of her jewels. When Mary protested, Henry dispatched his most important duke, who threatened to crack her skull against the wall. Perhaps Mary never cried as a baby, but now that was all she did, presumably out of her dad's hearing. Poor Elizabeth. Before she reached her 3rd birthday, Henry had Anne beheaded. Yes, one of the reasons Elizabeth wasn't a son. Elizabeth is known to have mentioned Anne only twice afterward, but all her life treasured a ring with 2 miniature portraits of her and her mom. Poor sisters. After Henry's next marriage, the sisters had a half-brother, Edward, the new favored one. His mother, Jane Seymour, died 2 weeks after his birth, before Henry thought of a reason to dispose of her. The 2 girls were pushed aside while Edward was groomed to be the next ruler. By age 6, Elizabeth was noted for her unsmiling face. People said that she looked as serious as a 40-year-old. Her dad's main interest was her moral development, and his theory of child-rearing involved surrounding her with ancient and sad persons. She was rescued by a stepmom, the king's 6th and final wife. Unusually well-educated for her day, Catherine Parr made a point of seeing that the obviously promising Elizabeth got the same rigorous education given to male heirs: languages, history, rhetoric, and philosophy. Usually, education for women was sketchy, as you can tell from her tutor's compliments. "Her mind has no womanly weakness," he wrote. "Her perseverance is equal to that of a man, and her memory long keeps what it quickly picks up." Elizabeth ended up much better educated than Mary, who was understandably bitter and insecure. Her father was too busy with his own marriages to arrange one for Mary. At 25, she had no real role. She was just Lady Mary, and the most unhappy lady in Christendom. Elizabeth was 13 when Henry died. She grieved briefly, but immediately regained her famous composure. Mostly, he had scared her. Since women had no power of their own, even 9-year-old Edward was seen as the better choice to rule than his older sisters. When he became king, the men around him began jockeying to be the power behind the throne. Mary and Elizabeth were pawns, tense rivals at a time when everyone around them was plotting for their own gain. People watched closely to see which sister was in favor, and the sisters simply avoided each other during his reign. I just realized that, they're related to the Romanovs, way distant, because their great-great-grandma was Queen Victoria. It just occurred to me this family's connected. When Edward caught an infection and died at age 15 in 1553, Mary saw her chance and proclaimed herself England's first ruling queen. Elizabeth immediately wrote to congratulate her. Then Mary rode triumphantly into London, with Elizabeth riding right behind her, careful not to attract too much attention, but also wanting their people to see her at her best. The show of sisterly love was just that, a show. Mary began making her mistrust very clear. Enemies were conspiring against her, and Elizabeth had no real way to prove she wasn't one of them. Perfecting the art of the answerless answer, Elizabeth lived in constant dread, her expression usually one of alarm. No one knew quite what to do with her. Keep her close, send her away. Anything she did could give Mary a reason to execute her, and Mary really wanted to, but Elizabeth had many supporters. Plus, she was her sister. So Mary played mind games. When Elizabeth would ask to see her, Mary would make her wait days in suspense before answering. Some days they sat together at meals, and Mary gave her fur coats or jewels. Other days Elizabeth was kept isolated. It was obvious that Mary wanted to keep tabs on her, but really she couldn't stand to be around her younger sister. Elizabeth felt humiliated, which was sort of the point. Queen Mary was unpopular from the get-go. She was Catholic in a mainly Protestant country, and she had no talent for politics. And she was a woman in charge, which was frowned upon at the time. A famous preacher wrote his disapproval. It is more than a monster in nature that a woman should reign and bear empire above man. Mary's unpopularity only increased when, at 37, she married another Catholic, King Philip II of Spain, and set about restoring England to its original faith by force when necessary. She revived the laws against heresy, which were violations of religious laws, and started torturing and killing Protestant heretics, displaying the rotting corpses all around London as warnings. Now you know why she was called Bloody Mary. During her 5-year reign, she had over 280 heretics burned at the stake. Crowds would gather, munching on snacks, to watch the gory spectacle. Her violent persecution didn't go over well, and people began to look at Elizabeth as a better option. Sure, she was a woman too, but at least she was a staunch Protestant. It was only a matter of time before this Draft Elizabeth campaign got her into trouble, and she was brought to court for questioning. At age 20, though fervently claiming her innocence, Elizabeth was ordered by Mary to be imprisoned for treason in the Tower of London. On the way there, she staged one of the first sit-ins and had to be carried inside. The next 2 months were mental torture. No books, pure boredom, no visitors, no news. She was left to think about things such as how to persuade her captors to bring in an executioner from France because they did a cleaner job. Mary did not mess around. After this plot, she executed the leader and also had him drawn and quartered, plus 100 of his followers, as well as her cousin Jane, also a rival for the throne. But after extensive interrogation and spying had revealed no hard evidence of treason on her part, Elizabeth did get released from the Tower. Her release was probably thanks to Philip. If Mary died and Elizabeth wasn't around, the English crown might go to their cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, creating a French alliance that Philip, the Spanish king, as well as Mary's husband, considered disastrous. What a twisted family tree they had. For the rest of her life, Elizabeth shuddered when she had to visit the Tower or even pass by it. Just because Mary spared Elizabeth's life didn't mean she trusted her. She placed her sister under house arrest in a private home for almost a year. The conditions were better than in the Tower, but she had little to occupy her mind besides exchanging angry letters with Mary, which only made matters worse. Mary's biggest nightmare was for Elizabeth to get the crown. It was unthinkable that a Protestant would follow her on the throne, so she was desperate to have a child who would be her heir. In an era when much about childbirth was mysterious, she had symptoms of pregnancy but never actually had a baby. It seemed to be a case for a recurring false pregnancy. For her very survival, Elizabeth had to pretend to go along with Mary's policies. But the sisters were still playing mind games, and Mary could see through Elizabeth's lies. In 1558, Elizabeth was called to court to attend the final stages of Mary's latest apparent pregnancy. Mary wanted to lord it over her. If she gave birth to a healthy child, Elizabeth's chances of becoming queen went way down. But again, there was no child. In fact, instead of bringing a new life into the world, Mary, at age 42, was actually dying, possibly of cancer. Gosh, I wonder if she felt like a tumor. Oh my gosh, that's dark. After her sister promised to keep pushing to make England Catholic, Mary finally named Elizabeth her heir. Elizabeth, now gloriously free of siblings, came to the throne amid bells, bonfires, and all sorts of gleeful demonstrations. But many still thought women were unfit to govern, and Mary's reign hadn't done much to correct the impression. Elizabeth had to chart her own path, and that included tolerance of all religions. She immediately reneged on her deathbed promise to Mary, stopped the executions, and released all Protestants from prison. The whole country sighed with relief. Maybe a woman could rule. Mary had actually made the concept easier to accept. She paved the way, and Elizabeth was able to learn from her mistakes. She was charismatic and a superb politician, always pragmatic. People liked her. They thought of her as a sort of honorary man, and she tried to present herself that way, as her father Henry's replacement. Like him, she had a spectacular temper, complete with swearing, spitting, screaming, slapping, bullying, death threats, which she sometimes carried out. Mostly the atmosphere in her court was one of fun, wit, and romance. Should anyone displease her, though, the air would suddenly chill. When her ladies-in-waiting played tricks on her and showed disrespect, she broke the finger of one and stabbed another in the hand with a fork. When an obscene pamphlet about her appeared, she had its author and his publisher arrested and their right hands chopped off. When her favorite companion started a rebellion, she had him executed. She never married, having seen only bad marriages around her, and also dreading a husband's interference with her rule. During her sibling-free reign, over the next 44 years, England became a major player on the world stage in politics, business, and the arts. She provided much-needed stability for the kingdom, and helped forge a sense of national identity. Most of all, her religious tolerance meant a lack of holy wars, which were wrecking other countries. It was Elizabeth who had the last laugh and gave her name to the whole era, the Elizabethan Age. You got the little comics over here too at the end. When your cousin wants to kill you. Elizabeth actually did execute a relative. Her closest heir was her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Also known as Mary Stuart, she was a Catholic supported by powerful Catholic countries such as France. Protestants had déjà vu, Bloody Mary all over again. It was too dangerous to let Mary leave England to go back to Scotland, but Elizabeth didn't know what to do except keep her imprisoned. Mary didn't help herself by constantly plotting against Elizabeth. After an especially blatant conspiracy to murder her in 1587, Elizabeth dithered for 3 months, and then with great reluctance had her cousin beheaded. A bloody age. Bloody Mary executed over 280 people for heresy, more than any other English ruler, but she wasn't the only royal who killed people. By comparison, her father Henry executed as many as 70,000 people for all kinds of reasons. Half-sister Elizabeth had 20 Catholics hanged. Mary's grandparents, Ferdinand and Isabella, burned 2,000 Muslims, Jews, and Protestants during the Spanish Inquisition. But perhaps unfairly, it was Mary who got stuck with the name. A new word, siblicide. Killing your siblings is rare among humans. It's frowned upon and has penalties. It's more likely to occur in the animal world. Black widow spider babies eat their weaker brothers and sisters, and some 24 of species of birds do away with theirs. Why? Life in the animal world can be harsh when food sources dwindle. Eliminating your competition means more for you, and you're more likely to survive and pass on your genes. Sibling rivalry. This term, meaning competition, sometimes bitter for attention from your parents, wasn't coined until 1941, 400 years after these Tudor sisters. But don't you think Elizabeth and Bloody Mary are the perfect example? I suppose so. So that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. There they are having a pillow fight. I hope that you have a good night. Good night.